People say your children will take care of you when you grow old, that after a lifetime of love and sacrifice, you'll be surrounded by gratitude, warmth, and respect. They say you'll be cherished. But on my 72nd birthday, my son handed me a black trash bag filled with my clothes and said, "Mom, the facility will be better for you. You'll have everything you need." He didn't even meet my eyes when he said it. His wife stood behind him, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line, like I was some burden finally being lifted. That was the day I stopped believing in promises unspoken. I stood there, in the foyer of the house I once painted with my own hands, holding a garbage bag full of my belongings, and nodded as if I agreed. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't ask why. I simply walked toward the door they were so eager for me to exit. What they didn't know is that the house they stood in, the house they thought was theirs to sell, to inherit, to rule over, was never theirs to begin with. I had made certain of that. It wasn't revenge I sought. It wasn't even justice, not exactly. What I wanted was dignity, quiet, unshakable dignity. And I had prepared for the day they would forget who built the walls they leaned on, who paid for every nail, every beam, every memory etched into those floors. I had always believed that love, given freely, would be returned in kind. But love, I have learned, does not guarantee loyalty. And when it fails, when your own child looks at you not as a mother, but as a problem to be solved, then all that's left is to remember who you were before the world made you small. This is the story of how I lost everything and found myself again. My name is Evelyn Moore. I'm 72 years old, a widow, and a mother of one. For most of my life, I believed in the quiet strength of sacrifice, the kind you don't boast about, the kind you carry like folded laundry, warm, necessary, and mostly unnoticed. I lost my husband Thomas when I was just 35. He was a miner, third generation, like his father and grandfather before him. We lived in a small town in West Virginia where the coal dust clung to everything like a second skin, and the sound of sirens was just part of life. Thomas died in a shaft collapse on a Thursday morning in November, just weeks before Christmas. He left behind a used Ford pickup, a mortgage on a modest 2-bedroom house, and a little boy named Daniel who had just turned 8. That morning, I remember getting a knock on the door from his supervisor. I was still in my robe, flour on my hands from baking biscuits. I knew before he even spoke. There's something about the way bad news walks, shoulders low, hat in hand, eyes heavy with apologies they didn't write. I didn't cry in front of him. I waited until the door closed. Then I walked into the living room, sat down on our plaid couch, and stared at the worn spot where Thomas's boots used to rest. Daniel came in moments later holding his toy fire truck. "Where's Daddy?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just pulled him into my lap and held him. We sat there for a long time, my tears falling silently onto his little red shirt. From that day forward, I was both mother and father. I worked as a cook at the local school cafeteria during the day and cleaned houses at night. I took on extra shifts, walked to work in the snow to save on gas, and clipped coupons like it was a religion. I did what mothers do. I made a life from the pieces left behind. There were nights I came home so tired I had to sit on the porch steps before I could summon the strength to walk inside. But Daniel made everything worth it. He was a good boy, bright, curious, always asking questions. He loved drawing rockets and dinosaurs, and I kept every single one of his crayon masterpieces in a tin box beneath my bed. When he was 12, his sneakers fell apart halfway through the school year. I remember taping the soles together with duct tape and promising I'd get him new ones by Christmas. That week, I skipped dinner 4 nights in a row, just tea and crackers for me, so I could afford a pair of Nikes he'd been dreaming of. The look on his face when he unwrapped that box. I could have sworn the room lit up brighter than the tree. We never had much, but I tried to give him everything I could. I was proud when he got into community college on a partial scholarship. I picked up extra cleaning clients to help cover the rest. I still have the photo from his graduation day. Daniel in a borrowed gown, me in my one good dress. Both of us grinning with eyes full of tired joy. The house we lived in, our little place on Cedar Hill Lane, was the one Thomas and I bought the year after we married. It had faded blue shutters and a creaky porch swing. I painted the kitchen cabinets myself, in a shade of mint green I later regretted but never changed. The mortgage took 28 years to pay off, but the deed was in my name. Always had been. When Daniel got married, I thought I was gaining a daughter. Her name was Vanessa, sharp-tongued, stylish, the type who never repeated an outfit. At first she was polite enough, but there was always a distance, like she was tolerating me rather than welcoming me. They moved in with me after their 2nd year of marriage. Daniel said they needed time to save for their own place, and of course, I agreed. I was happy to have them home. I converted the den into their bedroom, cleared out space in the garage for their boxes, and started cooking dinner for 3 instead of 1. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Vanessa complained about the thermostat, the food, the smell of my eucalyptus ointment. She started rearranging the living room, replacing my doilies with modern coasters, calling my things dated. Once, she told Daniel that the house smelled like old people. I was in the hallway when she said it. Daniel changed too. Slowly, subtly. He stopped talking to me over breakfast, started checking his phone at dinner. He deferred to Vanessa on everything, even things that had nothing to do with her. I remember one afternoon he asked me to stop using the laundry machine on Saturdays. It interfered with Vanessa's spa time. I should have spoken up more, but I didn't. I didn't want to be the bitter mother-in-law from TV sitcoms. I told myself they were just adjusting, that it would pass. It didn't. Then, on my 72nd birthday, I came downstairs expecting a quiet breakfast, or at least a happy birthday. What I found instead was Daniel and Vanessa standing in the kitchen looking nervous. "We need to talk," Daniel said. His voice was calm, rehearsed. Vanessa's arms were crossed. I sat at the kitchen table, my heart already sinking. "Mom," he began, "we've been thinking about what's best for everyone. We found a really nice assisted living facility just 20 minutes away. You'll have people around, nurses, meals, everything. You'll be safer there." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. Vanessa chimed in. "It's what people your age need. We've already booked the room. It's all set." My mouth opened, but no words came out. I looked at Daniel. His eyes were fixed on the counter, not meeting mine. "We'll help you pack," he added. "It's really for your own good." There was a black trash bag on the floor beside them, half full of my clothes. My clothes, in a garbage bag. I don't remember what I said, if I said anything at all. I stood up, walked to my room, and began folding my things in silence. The sound of zippers and plastic filled the air as I packed 72 years of life into a few bags. They drove me to the facility that afternoon. It was a gray building on the edge of town, with yellowing walls and a scent that clung to your clothes. Some mixture of antiseptic, overcooked peas, and despair. The hallway carpets were stained. The receptionist didn't smile. My room had a single bed, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over a loading dock. Daniel hugged me once, awkwardly, then left. Vanessa didn't come inside. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked around. The silence was deafening. I could hear a television playing game shows down the hall, a nurse laughing at something I couldn't see. No one asked me what I wanted. No one asked if I was okay. That night, I unpacked the same way I packed, quietly, deliberately, without tears. I hung up my cardigans in the tiny closet. I placed a photo of Thomas and Daniel on the dresser, and then I sat by the window and watched the sun go down behind a stack of delivery crates. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. What I felt then was something heavier than anger. It was a kind of emptiness that settles in your chest like cold water, a dull ache that tells you you've been forgotten not by strangers, but by the very people you gave your life to. They thought they'd moved me like a chess piece, a burden shifted, an obstacle removed, but they were wrong, because in my silence I had made preparations, and what they didn't know was going to change everything. Life inside the facility blurred into a series of quiet days and quieter nights. No one visited, not once. The nurses were kind but distant, and the aides always seemed short on time. Meals arrived on plastic trays, lukewarm and gray. There was bingo on Thursdays and hymn singing on Sundays, but I rarely joined. I wasn't angry, at least not in a way I could point to. I was simply hollow. In the evenings, I sat by my small window and watched the staff take out the trash. I often thought how fitting it was, considering that's how I had arrived. My life reduced to a black plastic bag. Most of the other residents had similar stories. One woman, Margaret, used to be a piano teacher. Her fingers were bent now, curled like dried leaves, but she still hummed Chopin while folding laundry. Her daughter hadn't come to see her in over a year. Then there was Mr. Frank, who'd been a mechanic for 40 years and was now afraid of buttons and zippers. His son had moved to Florida and sent him a Christmas card. Once, in the shared living room where the chairs smelled faintly of urine and disinfectant, I listened to their stories. I didn't speak much, but I listened. And as I did, I started to understand something I hadn't let myself admit before. I wasn't alone. We were all passengers on the same forgotten ship, drifting quietly toward the end, cast off by those we loved most. One night, while folding the same cardigan for the third time to keep my hands busy, I found myself thinking of Daniel's college graduation. I'd bought a second-hand dress from Goodwill and borrowed a friend's sun hat to wear. It was fraying at the edges, and I'd pinned it with a safety clip to keep it together. Daniel never noticed. He just grinned and said, "You made it, Mom. We made it." Back then, that had been enough to keep me going. But time has a way of pulling back the curtain on people, of revealing what's real and what's rehearsed. I didn't hear from Daniel or Vanessa for nearly 4 months after they dropped me off. Then, one afternoon, the receptionist came down the hall holding a manila envelope. "Miss Moore," she said, "you've got mail." It was a flyer, glossy, professional, a real estate agency's promotional mailer, the kind they send out to entice new clients. And there, in full color, was my house. Charming 2-bedroom home in quiet, established neighborhood, original wood floors, beautiful porch swing, move-in ready, price to sell. I stared at the page for a long time. There was no mistaking it. The mint green kitchen cabinets were still there, unchanged since I painted them in the late 80s. The porch swing with the small crack in the armrest. The lilac bushes I planted after Thomas died. Every detail, every memory, commodified, priced, and polished for strangers to walk through. I sat down on the edge of my bed and let the paper slide into my lap. So, that was their plan. They thought they'd placed me neatly away, tucked out of sight like an old sweater in a box, and now they were cashing in on what they believed was their inheritance. I waited. Days passed. Weeks. I knew what was coming. Daniel finally called. "Hi, Mom," he began, his voice overly cheery, like a boy caught sneaking cookies before dinner. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." I didn't say much. I let him talk. He rambled about how busy he'd been, how work was stressful, how Vanessa's mother had surgery. Then, casually, he dropped it in. "By the way, we're going to sell the house, to get something smaller. It's just too big for the two of us." I almost laughed, not bitterly, just at the audacity. "That's your choice," I replied evenly. He paused. "I figured you'd say that. Look, Mom, it's not like you're coming back or anything. It'll be better this way, for everyone." I hung up soon after. The following week, I got a call from the agency. "Mrs. Moore, I'm calling to schedule a time for you to sign the seller's disclosures. Your son mentioned you might still be on the title." I waited a beat, then said, "You'll need to contact my attorney." There was a long pause on the other end. "Oh, okay. May I have their name?" I gave it to them. 2 days later, the real call came, from Daniel himself. This time, his tone was different. "Mom, why is there a lawyer involved?" I didn't answer right away. "I mean, it's just the house, right? You're not even living there." "That's right," I said, "but I still own it." Silence. I thought, Vanessa said, "Daniel," I said calmly, "the house was never yours. It never belonged to either of you. It's still in my name." He stuttered. "But you left. You said nothing." "That doesn't mean I gave you everything." I could hear the tension unraveling through the phone line, papers shuffling, raised voices in the background. Vanessa likely demanding explanations. Later that week, he drove to the law office himself, confident in whatever version of the story he had convinced himself was true. He was met by my attorney, a woman I'd known since she was a girl in Sunday school. She handed him a single piece of paper. As of 2 weeks before Mrs. Moore's departure from her residence, it read, the property in question was legally transferred to the Homes for Widows Foundation, a registered nonprofit organization. Daniel didn't understand at first. He asked to see the deed. They showed it. He asked about the transfer. They showed the signature. He asked if it could be reversed. They told him no. That was the moment it hit him, the moment he realized he hadn't just lost the house. He had never owned it. The foundation had no interest in selling it to him. In fact, they planned to turn it into a transitional shelter for elderly women experiencing housing insecurity. By the time Daniel left the office, his face was pale, his fists clenched, his voice hoarse from shouting. The next morning, I received a call from him. He was furious. "How could you do this to us?" he shouted. "Do you have any idea what we've invested in that house? The time? The plans we had?" "I know exactly what I invested," I said softly. 38 years of mortgage payments, repairs, sleepless nights, holidays alone, and dinners skipped so you could eat better. That house was my life, and I've decided to give it to women who remember the value of a home. There was no answer on the line, just silence. Then a beep. He'd hung up. I didn't hear from him again for a long time, but word got around. My neighbor, Mrs. Bingham, sent me a letter with newspaper clippings. The foundation had issued a press release about their new shelter project. A local reporter did a feature story on the woman who gave her home to strangers. It wasn't strangers, not really. They were just women like me, forgotten, cast aside, quietly strong. Vanessa tried to sue the foundation for undue influence. The case was laughed out of court. Daniel's boss, it turned out, was a board member of that same foundation. His promotion evaporated. Their friends began to distance themselves. Some called it karma, others called it consequence. I called it balance. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. It wasn't a sudden decision. I didn't wake up one day with a fiery plan or a desire for retribution. No, it was something quieter than that. A seed planted slowly, silently, over time, watered each time Daniel turned away, each time Vanessa rolled her eyes at the dinner table, each time I felt the invisible line between us grow wider. It started the night after Daniel told me I would be moving out. I didn't sleep much. I sat in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside me, not rage, but clarity, a kind of still resolve. I opened my dresser drawer and pulled out the manila envelope that held all the important papers, the house deed, the insurance documents, a faded photo of Thomas holding baby Daniel in our backyard. My fingers lingered on that picture a long time. The next morning, before they woke up, I walked to the law office of Rebecca Langston. She was only 35, but I remembered her as Becky, the shy girl with braces who used to sit 2 pews in front of us at church. Her father had fixed our fence once after a storm. I had baked them lemon bars as thanks. Funny how lives crisscross like threads in an old quilt. "Mrs. Moore," she said, surprised as I stepped into her office. "What can I help you with?" I closed the door behind me and sat down across from her desk. "I need to transfer the deed of my home," I said, placing the envelope on the table. "Not to my son, not to any family. I want to donate it to a cause that matters." Becky blinked, leaned forward, and listened as I explained. We sat there for nearly 2 hours. I told her about Thomas, about the house we'd built, about Daniel, about the slow unraveling of respect that had brought me to this moment. I cried once, briefly, when I spoke about my birthday. Becky reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. She didn't try to talk me out of it. By the end of the meeting, we had begun the legal process. The recipient? Homes for Widows, a nonprofit I'd read about in the church bulletin. They helped elderly women find transitional housing and offered community support programs for those who had no one left to turn to. It felt right. More than that, it felt just. 2 weeks later, the papers were signed. I made a copy of the transfer document and slipped it into the envelope, placing it back in the drawer. I told no one, not Daniel, not Vanessa, not even the few friends I still had. It was my decision, and mine alone. The aftermath, as you know, was swift. When Daniel discovered the truth, he came unraveled. The foundation held firm. The press got involved. A modest feature turned into a local sensation, then a regional one. I never gave interviews, never posed for pictures. That wasn't the point. Daniel and Vanessa were humiliated. Their attempt to sue the charity only drew more attention to the nature of their actions. Sponsors dropped Vanessa's online business. Daniel was quietly moved to a less prominent role at his firm. And at home, well, from what I heard, things were no better. Mrs. Bingham, ever the faithful gossip, sent me a letter soon after. "Sweetie, you wouldn't believe how fast their friends disappeared. Some said Daniel looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. As for Vanessa, I haven't seen her smile since Halloween." I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The balance had been restored. Back at the facility, I kept to myself as usual. But one day, during lunch, a new nurse named Clara sat beside me. She was young, maybe 25, with curly hair and eyes that noticed things. "You're the one who gave away her house, aren't you?" she asked softly. I looked at her, unsure what to say. Clara smiled. "I think that's one of the bravest things I've ever heard." We started talking after that, about little things at first: food, books, the weather. She had a gentle way of coaxing stories out of people without making them feel exposed. I told her I used to cook, that I once catered for weddings on the weekends when money was tight, that my biscuits could hold their own against any diner in the state. She laughed. Well, it just so happens the retirement community where my aunt works is looking for someone like you. It's not a job, really. More like a presence. Someone to teach. Someone to make the kitchen smell like home again. I didn't say yes right away. I was hesitant, afraid maybe, of starting over, of hoping again. But a week later, Clara drove me to the place, a modest, independent living community nestled on the edge of town, surrounded by oak trees and the sound of birdsong. The residents lived in small apartments, not rooms. There was a garden, a library, and, most importantly, a kitchen large enough for 10 people to gather without bumping elbows. They welcomed me like family. Within a month, I was hosting Wednesday baking sessions. We made peach cobblers, cornbread, and apple pies from scratch. I showed a man named Walter how to knead dough with arthritic fingers. I helped Dolores recreate her mother's meatloaf recipe from memory. I told stories, not bitter ones, but stories filled with flavor and laughter, the kind that linger like cinnamon in the air. No one asked me why I came. No one pitied me. They just accepted me. Some nights, I sat on the little balcony outside my unit, a cup of chamomile in hand, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. I thought of Thomas often. I imagined him smiling, proud, not because I had outwitted anyone, but because I had finally chosen peace. I kept the picture of Daniel and me from his graduation in a drawer. I didn't look at it often, but I didn't throw it away either. It wasn't anger I held on to. It was memory, a reminder of what had once been and what could have been different. In that place, among strangers who became friends, I found something I hadn't felt in years: usefulness. I wasn't just waiting out my days. I was filling them, folding them like dough, warm and full of purpose. And for the first time in a long time, I belonged. I sleep well these days, not because the mattress is newer or the sheets are softer, but because, for the first time in my life, I chose myself. It took me 72 years to understand that love, when given freely, is not a contract. It does not guarantee return. It is a gift, and gifts can be treasured, or they can be taken for granted. I gave my son everything I had, not just a roof and food and schooling, but my time, my strength, my quiet endurance, the kind of love that waits up late, clips coupons, irons shirts at midnight, and bites back words when it's easier to scream. And for a long time, I believed that was enough, that it would speak for itself, that love, real love, would be seen and felt and one day returned. But it wasn't. I don't hate Daniel. I don't wish him harm. I hope, in his own way, he finds his path again. But I no longer carry the weight of his choices. I no longer shrink myself in the hopes of fitting into a place he cleared without asking if I still wanted to be part of it. Perhaps one day he'll understand that losing a house is nothing compared to losing a mother. And perhaps if he's lucky, he'll remember the way I used to sing while folding his laundry, or the smell of cinnamon rolls on cold Saturday mornings. Maybe, in some quiet moment, he'll feel the absence not of property, but of presence. As for me, I found something unexpected in this new chapter, a life not built on duty or fear of loneliness, but on joy, connection, and peace. I teach, I bake, I listen, I belong. And when I look in the mirror, I see a woman who may have been forgotten by some, but who never forgot her own worth. That, I think, is the quiet triumph of age. not in shouting to be heard, but in living so truthfully that your silence says everything.